All right, guys.
These are nice
How we doing?
chairs.
These are big chairs, I know.
Yeah, big chairs.
Super comfy. Are there any Nerf bullets today? No? Okay, good. Gentlemen, I'm super honored, first of all, to get this opportunity to sit with both of you guys. Wes, especially getting to work with you. We've worked together now 4 years, I think.
We started with AC at the exact same time. I think
Yes.
you were a month before me.
Yes.
But I
yes.
think it
I
was
am your
the
senior.
same summer.
Yes, it was the same summer. And I think I met you, it would have been almost a full year before when I was just a guest at the AC conference the first time. So that's really cool. And Ruslan, it's great to get to meet you in person. As I said, I've been a big fan of your art, your creativity for a long time. So
thank you.
As genuinely just fans of both of you as in your expertise, but also just
I'm also
as people.
a fan of you, Troy.
No, don't do
No,
this.
I'm a fan of you.
Yeah, well, okay. Put the QR code up. Do I have one? Just kidding. We're about to have a time of Q&A, and as you guys know, you can scan the QR code that is on the screen, and we'll be moderating questions. And so I'm just gonna tell you right now, there's a whole lot of you, and it's amazing, but we will not get to all your questions. So please don't send me an email, okay? They're full, and I can't handle another one. But we're gonna get right into this conversation. And so one of the first questions we got here is from Lucas, and the question is, what do we do with media concerning the enactment of Christ like The Chosen, where historical liberties are taken to portray the gospel? Yeah, that's a doozy.
Yeah.
You go first.
Okay. It's interesting. So I am on the side of this conversation where I know people who love The Chosen and people who hate The Chosen. Yes. I think I can appreciate something like The Chosen for what it is in that there's artistic license. Now, when I had a friend who started watching The Chosen, and the way he described it to me was that when he started reading his Bible, he started picturing, what's the actor's name? Who's in The Chosen?
Jonathan Rumi.
What was it?
Jonathan Rumi.
Jonathan Rumi.
Jonathan Rumi. He started picturing Jonathan Rumi, and that concerned him. And the way that he described it, he said that when he watched the Lord of the Rings movies, and then he read the books. And when he started to read the books, these thoughts popped up in his mind where he was like, that didn't happen. That's not how that narrative goes. And he was confusing the source material. And I think that I know people who have really benefited from looking at the artistic license in something like The Chosen. And I know people who they've in their minds, for better or for worse, started confusing the source material. And so I think there's wisdom in pausing and looking at The Chosen, or any of these other artistic depictions, like the David one that you mentioned, Ruslan, for what they are, and not trying to make more of them than they're actually trying to portray. Yeah. I think there are dangers in that, sure. But I think there's also an aspect of humanizing. When I was a kid, it was a reenactment of the Gospel of Matthew, where it was a narrator reading the Gospel of Matthew, and the disciples and Jesus and all the rest were just kind of acting out what was being said. And there's one scene sticks out in my mind where it says, and they dropped their nets and they followed him, and the actors just kind of go, I mean, like, okay.
That's what they did. That's what they did.
I think that's something where The Chosen can make it more organic and actually contribute to our understanding of Scripture, as long as we're clear on what the source material is and isn't.
That's good.
Yeah,
good. Ruslan, did you have
I would just add, and I'm like absolutely biased, just for the record. So I'm friends with Dallas. I've been to Chosen Con. I was just with John Irwin in Dallas to do an interview for the House of David. So this is me that's my friends, yeah. Right? But this is what I would say. I think we have to let people define what they're creating instead of telling them what they're creating. Yeah. And we do this all the time. We want to tell people what they're making instead of saying, instead of hearing what they're making. So they're not making a Bible show, they're making fan fiction inspired by the Bible. Yeah. Yeah. And they've always been transparent about that. This is how I would define it. Back in the day, I used to have a buddy, he worked at a supplement store, and there was a window of time where he didn't have any money. And so he started living off of protein shakes. Wow. And after about a week... It doesn't
work, I've been there.
Yeah, after about... For real.
It's not good for the digestive system.
Not at all. After a week, to Wes's point, he had to go to the hospital and get his stomach pumped.
Right. Right.
protein shakes are not sustenance, they're supplements. Cannot survive off of supplements. So the Chosen Christian Podcast, whatever you want to talk about, are not sustenance. They're not your bread. They're not what you're supposed to feast on. They're just supplements in your journey. And I think when we mix up the categories, then we start doing things like reading the Bible and envisioning Jonathan Rumi.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, I think just as you guys are both kind of saying, I mean, it leads to idolatry essentially to the wrong direction, right? Now you're focusing on the person and the content rather than, you know, what they're supposed to be portraying, right? It shouldn't replace your study.
Yeah, and again, just to add a bit more, the data all shows that the Chosen is driving people to read the Bible more, not less.
Cool. That's awesome.
Which I think is a massive net positive.
Next question here. How can we combat technology/phone addiction in a world where it is so heavily relied on for communication?
I don't know if I have an answer to that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna be very cheesy with it. I ended up buying one of these like invisible little boxes, not invisible, clear boxes. And I like put my phone in there and I lock it up.
I have an invisible box right here.
There's an invisible box right here. We put our phone.
I was like, okay.
I brought one with me.
We all see the box, right? He's a guest. All right.
So I got a little thing. I put my phone in there. I'll put my phone away. There's another little thing called Brick, where you can tap your phone and it'll brick certain apps. So I think these are one of these, like, we all have to have wisdom and self-control and boundaries with the technology. Use the technology, don't let it use you. And to me, I just try to have those things in place so that when I'm not working, I'm not working.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Gavin Ortland, who has a YouTube channel that everybody should check out, Truth Unites, he goes on sabbaticals, particularly over the weekend, where he just doesn't touch his computer or use his phone. And that helps him as someone who does, make online content, not just get consumed with needing to check whatever the notifications are, or even like text messages and stuff. So I think there are ways that we can mitigate this proliferation and just onslaught of communication. When I was I did my undergraduate studies in sociology, and undergrad taught me how to write book reports on books I'd never read. And there was a book that I did a book report on called Alone Together by Sherry Turkle, which I've since read, and is actually a really good book. And in that book, this is what she talks about, right? That we have so much communication that we're actually, it's not creating connection, it's isolating us. Mm-hmm. And so I think the more and more we can move away from talking to people online and talking to people in person and being proactive with that in reducing the amount of, I turn all notifications off on my phone just because there's too many. I'll check them when I need to check them, but I can't have my phone just constantly popping up with them. Yeah. So, like I said in my talk, with there's so many benefits to these types of technologies, but there's also so many drawbacks. Yeah. And screen addiction is a legitimate thing and has a lot of concerns that come with it.
Yeah, that's good. Here's a fun one. What's the wildest or funniest misconception about Christianity you've seen online that made you go, yeah, we need to talk about this?
I think the goofiest is the idea that God's ways and God's standards are oppressive and bad. And so that's a conversation that I think has been had and still has and is popular in the zeitgeist. Is like you start looking at God's standards and thinking they're bad. Yeah. And I think they're absolutely good. And so the practical aspects of following Jesus, I think, are good for people. The ways and the wisdom of God are good for people. So that's top of mind for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, pointing out the inadequacies of Christianity in the church, and that is an argument against Christianity. Paul writes letters to churches, and he's like, guys, there's a person in your congregation sleeping with his mom. Stop it. This is evidence, I think, for the fact of what Scripture talks and tells us about the brokenness of humanity. that, we are never going to do that perfectly. If you find the perfect church, don't go there, you're going to mess it up. And so when people tell me, I don't want to go to church, it's full of hypocrites, I'm like, yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
I don't want to take my car to the mechanic because the mechanic's place is full of broken cars. And you're like, yes. The mechanics is where you get your car fixed.
Yeah.
So, I think I understand what the misunderstanding and the misapprehension is, in that people think that we need to get our lives together and that's how God is going to accept us.
Yeah.
But the message of the gospel is that that's inverted.
Yeah.
We can't get our lives together. That's why we need Christ.
Amen. That's good. That's good. This question directed to you, Wes. What's your message to influential people such as Dr. Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan, who are showing some great interest in Christianity but have not yet committed?
I think something, and Ruslan has talked about this on his program too, we're in a very unique window of time where you do have people who are much more friendly to Christianity as a worldview concept. Now, that's not the same thing as stepping over the line and confessing Jesus Christ as Lord. And I think that's where a lot of people need to get, and they're not there. And so I think, there's a lot of benefits to people like Jordan Peterson or Douglas Murray or Tom Holland actually not being Christian and communicating these truthful facts about Christianity, because in one way, they can't be accused of then just being biased Christians.
Right.
And I think there's an advantage to that, albeit I want them to be Christians. But I think what they're cueing into is that the seeds that were planted from worldviews like atheism have grown into dead and stinking, rotting trees, and the fruit cannot be eaten. And so they're looking into what are these value systems that give us ideas like justice and hope and meaning and virtue, things that our society is very, very in tune with right now. Justice is a big societal concept. And people like Tom Holland, the historian, not the Spider-Man actor, is pushing into that and saying, where do we get this from? It always needs to be prefaced.
Are you sure,
There's always someone in the audience who's like, Tom Holland did what?
Poor Zendaya, honestly.
That guy's a Renaissance man. I think it's really unique. And as someone who is communicating with Joe Rogan, which is a weird thing to say.
That is very odd.
I think he's certainly thinking these things over in a way that he was not 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's largely due to people around him who are influencing him, and a lot of just regular Christians who are living faithful lives and are impacting him just by being faithful in their everyday just kind of practice.
That's good. That's good. Ruslan, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, you got it. That's it.
We do have one directed to you. I'm not familiar with... Did they high five?
Yeah.
Best friends. Okay. Ruslan, do you think the online trad movement is something the church ought to lean into as the culture swings more religious, or is it just a trend?
Say that one more time. Online what?
Online trad movement.
Oh, the online trad movement.
Yeah.
Ask the question again. I missed the first one.
Do you feel like that movement is something the church ought to lean into as the culture swings more religious, or is it just a trend? And maybe define online trad.
Yeah, online trad movement, it's like there's a big desire from certain conservative pockets to get back to like traditional gender roles within marriage.
Yeah.
And I think that it tends to be the downstream effects, my opinion, of some of what you hinted at, where like you like some of the worldview aspects, but not the truth claims of it. And so you're not getting a robust version of Christianity, in my opinion. I think we would call this in our circles Christless conservatism. I'm a conservative.
Yeah.
I'm a Jesus follower first, though.
Yeah.
So I have to filter all of my paradigms and my ideologies through the lens of Jesus. And I think the issue with that, the trad movement is that sometimes it lacks Jesus and lacks Christ. And then you're just getting a form of legalism, in my opinion. So society will tend to go to one of two extremes. One extreme is legalism, whereas like, women can't work jobs ever, right? That's legalism, right? Or to liberalism. You could be whatever you want to be, and a boy can be a girl, and a girl can be a boy, and who cares, and right? But I think Jesus is consumed and concerned with us having liberation. Neither legalism nor liberalism, but liberation.
Yeah.
So freedom in Christ, and that could be so unique based on the season that you're in.
Yeah.
So these hyper generalizations that like a woman can't work a job. Okay, well, first of all, what do you mean by work? Because my wife stays home with the kids. And let me tell you, that's work.
Yeah. Shout out to the stay-at-home parents. Oh my word.
Like that's a lot of work. And there is no hour lunch break, and there is no 15-minute, and there is no commute. There is no commute where you can shut your brain off and listen to your favorite podcast. So to me, it's like, what are we even talking about, right? Yeah. And I think that's the downstream effects. But I do think there is some interesting aspect where like Gen Z and Gen Alpha is desiring to get back to a more, I guess, traditional paradigm. Yeah. But then I would say, like, based on what? Because if I read Proverbs 31, granted, that's a woman who is much more further along in life. She's seasoned, sounds like her kids are a little older. Yeah. She's industrious. She's entrepreneurial, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the hard lines aren't helpful. I think so much of this in the Christian virtue ethic is about what is the season of life you're in, right? So the trad movement would be like, no, women fit into this neat little box. And it's like, okay, when a woman has a little baby and she's raising a child, it's totally different than when your kids are 15. Yeah. Right? Different season of life. So I think hypergeneralizations tend to be unhelpful, and I think they kind of do that to a fault. But I find it intriguing, and I think it's another version of Christless conservatism.
That's good. Did you have any thoughts? Okay.
Wes, come on, man.
Yeah. This dynamic is sickening. I'm not gonna lie to you. Do you think it's okay to use clickbait? Oh, you guys. You know what you did. Do you think it's okay to use clickbait and other tactics to pull in more viewers, word for word, or exaggerations, etc.?
So let's just address the elephant in the room, huh?
Take your time. Take your time.
So here's the thing. I think we have to be specific on what we mean by clickbait. Yeah. YouTube deprioritizes clickbait in my historical understanding of it. Yeah. When something is deceptive, people click in. The metrics that YouTube is looking for is not the click into the CPM, the click into the video. What YouTube is looking at is the watch duration. So if you have a video and everyone clicks in because it's a crazy thumbnail, right? Kanye West comes back to Jesus and plugs into Apologetics Canada's, like,
what?
Right?
Wait.
Right?
Surprise.
Like if I were to make a video like that
podcast
and I were to Photoshop Wes and Kanye standing next to each other.
Crazy. Please do that. But
a
anyway.
lot of people would click into that video. Yeah. Right? But what would happen in the algorithm is YouTube would go, a lot of people are clicking in, but no one's watching because you're lying.
Yeah.
Okay? So they click out and then YouTube deprioritizes that. Now, if we're saying clickbait as in an interesting, intriguing title that has some degree of conflict about something people care about, well then, no. That's just good packaging. That's good storytelling. Yeah. That's something we're interested in, right? Now, sometimes they'll get you. I remember I was on CNN and it said, Apple discontinuing this essential accessory. And I was like, ooh, what is it? And I click in and it's like the dongle for the old version of the aux cable. Yeah. And I was like, well, they don't even make the old, so they got me. Yeah. Right? So sometimes stuff like that happens. So I would just say it would depend by what you mean by clickbait and what are we saying. If it's something interesting, sometimes someone gets me and I'm just like, man, you can have that. Like, you earned that one.
Got rickrolled?
Right?
Okay.
Because I'm watching and I read the article, So I think it would just depend on what we're talking about specifically.
That's good.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm like, some of you guys went and got McDonald's last night because of clickbait, all right? You saw the ad and you went and you got those hot, tasty French fries. So don't get mad at clickbait. All right. This next question, new mediums, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, etc., are shortening our attention spans. How can we battle that because the gospel is so much more than a 30-second clip?
I think maybe we need to figure out ways to communicate the gospel in 30 seconds. You know what? I think this is true, but at the exact same time, the most popular podcasts right now are long form. And so it's this strange dichotomy where, yes, you have TikTok, and yes, you have Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, but as the podcasts that are getting the multi-hundred million download a month kind of input are the Joe Rogans and the Patrick Bet-Davids and the Sean Ryans and these guys who do 3-hour-long podcasts. So I think it's a both and. People want short and pithy, but they also want to actually hear someone over a long range of time communicate and actually be a person and humanize themselves. And so I think there's a reality to, and even the YouTube algorithms are prioritizing longer and longer videos right now. It's not the short videos that get the prioritization for the algorithmic models. It's the longer videos. Yeah. So I think there are a number of things going on at the exact same time. I think we do need to figure out how do you make an elevator pitch for something like the gospel, and how do you communicate that effectively in a long form format? So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and I think in a world where we're often proliferated with short, pithy statements, there's a value and a virtue in figuring out how to say things well and how to say things effectively in a shorter space, without the danger of confusing the conclusion of an argument with the actual rationale for that argument. And this is the danger of the short pithiness, is that when you're on X and you've been on Twitter/X for years, you kind of get into the mode where the statement is confused with the argument, and that's not necessarily the same thing. In one of the talks I give, which I call How to Talk About Jesus Without Sounding Like an Idiot, I talk about the fact that an argument is like the roof of a house. And so you don't start building the house by starting with the roof. You build the foundation and the walls and everything else, and that's the rationale and the argumentation. It's only the argument that you put on top. And I think one of the dangers of the fact that we live in this society where, I know Twitter is no longer 114 characters, but for a long time it was. When it was 114 characters, we started to confuse just statements with actual arguments. Yeah. It's illogical to believe in God. Okay, well, that's not an argument, that's a statement. And so it's the rationale that we need to figure out, okay, well, how do we come to that conclusion? What do we mean by these sort of statements that are thrown out? And so it's a both and situation. We need to figure out how do we say things that are short and effective and clear and don't mince words, that communicate the effectiveness of something like the gospel, and not then sacrifice being able to articulate clearly and provide rationale for what we're actually saying.
That's good.
Yeah, that's great. I would just add that YouTube has more than 1 billion monthly viewers of podcasts.
Wow.
So I don't know how much I believe that statement, that short form. I think podcast is where everything seems to be going, and that's just YouTube. We're not talking Apple Podcasts, Spotify, which is invested probably hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion into podcasting. I just don't know how true that is. I think that those style of videos, I think everyone knows that, like, when you're on TikTok and you're just in a brain rot cycle. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You're just like scrolling, doom scrolling. And even TikTok's prioritizing longer videos. Yeah. Right? So yeah, I just don't know how accurate that statement is personally.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say too, with YouTube even creating shorts as a separate section, that it's like we're going to be very intentional. This is 1 minute, but then everything else is celebrating long form, like you guys are saying. This is a good question that I found. Can you speak to persecution in regards to social media? Is it a thing? Do the scriptures that speak about believers being hated apply to social media? It's a great question.
Maybe, but probably not. I think we need to be really careful when we throw around the word persecution, because there's legitimate persecution happening around the world, particularly with Christians. That is not someone said something mean to me on Twitter. And we genuinely need to use discernment with a word like persecution, which has a big connotation, especially when there are countries around the world where Christians are being rounded up and killed.
Yes. In the recent news.
In the recent news. And so, but it's this strange give and take where, so I was a missionary kid for a portion of my childhood in the Middle East, and then after I graduated high school, I went back to the Middle East and worked in Jordan. And when I was working in Jordan, I was working with a particular individual. We were working with Bedouin out in the Jordanian desert, and he was originally from Alberta. And he told me, Wes, I really don't want to go back to the West because I don't know if I can handle I'm trying to think of how exactly he worded it. Basically what he was expressing was that the secularization in the West that he had experienced, particularly with like the sexualization of things, he felt more oppressive for him personally than being in a country, which mind you, Jordan is a pretty easy country in terms of majority Muslim countries to live in, but he would rather deal with the kind of low-level persecution in Jordan than he would with kind of the proliferation of constant sexualization in the West. And it made me rethink, that's not necessarily persecution, but it definitely reframed my understanding of something like what people are willing to deal with in terms of temptation and hardship. But I do think we need to be careful when we throw around words persecution, because if you look at the early church and you look at Nero burning Christians in his gardens as lamps, or people being thrown into the Colosseums and being eaten by lions, or drowned, or burned, or hanged, or throughout church history, there could be some aspect of persecution that exists for online content creators, but it needs to be calibrated to a certain degree. That's not my feelings are hurt because of what someone has said to me, in context to people whose lives are actually in danger.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I would say that we know that online bullying is real, and I think that kids especially need to be taught on how to navigate that and boundaries and all that sort of stuff, and that stuff has definitely caused harm to various degrees. But as someone that comes from actual physical harm and persecution, I think what Wes is saying is true as well. So I think we have to be delicate with words, because I see both sides. I see people that definitely feel persecuted and feel, approached and ridiculed. But yeah, I think there's a pretty big chasm of difference between people's physical safety and someone talking to online. That online can definitely hurt and can be harmful, especially if you're younger, if your brain's not fully developed, you don't know how to engage, you don't know how to put your phone down. That could definitely be harmful for sure, if that's your entire life is the internet. So I think we need to teach better boundaries around that sort of stuff and probably really push out how early kids get on social media and limiting their access.
Yeah, that's good. Last question that I have for both of you. In the age where you have a lot more online personalities, right? People have access to a phone, they have access to social media, and many people are verbal processors, that kind of thing. What would your advice or your wisdom be for people that say, I want to do what Wes is doing online, I want to do what Ruslan is doing online. How do I start? When do I know if I should, or do I know if I should even do that? How do I know if I should do that?
You want to make Manuscript Monday posts? Is that what you're doing?
Yes. Just the online personality, right?
Yeah, I mean, the caveat to that is that I have no idea what I'm doing online. What do you say, Ruslan?
Oh, man. How do you know when you should? I think the bigger question is, what expertise, insight, or value do you have to offer? That's the first question.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, we need more folks who don't quite understand the technology, but have the expertise to learn the technology.
Yeah.
So if you're educated and you're a teacher and you're smart, we need more Wes's and Gavin Ortlands on YouTube, in my opinion. And so I think one, do you have expertise and value to offer that you can go deep on a topic on? And I think that's the first question. The flip side to that is like, if you're just a young guy who has a knack for tech and you're charismatic and you want to contextualize your faith or you want to do a podcast, I think that the inverse to that is don't position yourself as an authority on something.
Yeah.
Lean into other people's authority. That's a bit what my breakout is going to be about. So I think that's the key question. And so if someone is naturally good and charismatic, I'm not going to be like, no, don't, bad, right? That's silly. I would say, hey, but don't position yourself as like an expert. And so if I'm thinking of younger creators, the conversation I'm constantly having with them, kids that are, 20 to 25, is like, hey, just document your journey. Talk about things that you're interested in. Don't try to position yourself as a teacher. And I don't know where that line is for people and what position in life they're in to be online like that. So I would just say it would just depend, and you got to use wisdom and discernment and seek the Lord on it. Yeah. And then dabble, experiment, try different things, Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, find what you're passionate about and lean into that.
Like swords.
Like swords. And don't try to force it. Don't try to make fetch happen.
Yeah. Carry on as you were.
And because I think what people genuinely want is authenticity. And so if you find what you're genuinely passionate about and press into that and then make content on that, then people are going to recognize that, and that's going to, and even if it doesn't gain traction, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
And here's the message I think we need to hear, is that when Jesus says that our goal is to stand before the throne of God and hear, well done, good and faithful servant, there are two very important words that are in that, right? Faithful and servant.
Yeah.
Not influential, not intelligent, not most tech savvy, just faithful.
Yeah.
We're just called to be faithful, and we're just called to be a servant. And so whether that looks like making online content, or whether that looks like helping out with your youth group, or whether that looks like volunteering at church, or whether that looks like helping out with the food bank, or whether that looks like pushing into the career where you are right now, the danger is that we look at the grass is greener on the other side and have that mentality, when really the grass is going to be green where you water it.
That's good.
And so if God, wherever God has put you right now, is probably where he wants you to be. And so finding your passion and finding the way that you can find how God is calling you to be where you are right now, whether that means the utilization of technology or not, is the way that you can truly make an impact in a world which is constantly telling you that you need to be an influencer, when you don't need to be an influencer.
Yeah.
You need to be a faithful servant.
That's good.
Yeah, let me just add, that's great.
That's great.
I would just add two more things to that. Number one, sometimes what you're passionate about has a lot to do, may not overlap with what's happening. And so you might be an early adapter to a niche that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, are you willing to do that? Because the false perception sometimes is that like being an influencer or podcaster is easy. It's none of this is easy. It's actually very difficult. But the second caveat is like that word passion, which I love that word. You're using it in like the top line definition, which is like what you're interested about, your yearning desire. But there's a second definition of passion, which is like the passion of the Christ, right? Like the suffering of Jesus. And so anyone that's trying to get into building anything, you have to have, in my opinion, have to have that deeper layer of passion. Are you willing to suffer for said thing?
Yeah.
And if you're into, condescending of different swords like you do with your...
I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Swing, swing,
videos,
my friend.
right?
Swing, swing.
And you're trying to make a YouTube channel off of that, like hypothetically, because that's your passion.
Yeah.
Well, there may not be a niche there. There may not be an audience there yet. And you might be early to it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And it might take a while for that to build up, but you're an early adapter to it. So I think in that, like, we have to understand that you might just be the early one to the party. Or it might have been a niche that died out. A niche that died out recently is like family vlogging. All kinds of ethical dilemmas came up with it. That's not really a world anymore that people care about or care to see, because are the kids getting paid? Is this exploitive, right? So that world. So if you're trying to get into family vlogging now, like, ship's kind of sailed.
Yeah.
You know, now you could do that for personal, like, hey, I want to document this and show my kids when they're older. Like, that's sweet, but that's not necessarily a path to grow on. So I think so much of this is nuance, and I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, but I think what Wes said is great. Like, lean into the things that you're passionate about, but in passion, like, you got to be willing to suffer for the things you care about. And most people aren't willing to do that.
My next book is going to be called Make Manuscript Monday Post for a Decade, and it'll be on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's it though, Wes. Like, you were doing stuff for decades.
Yep.
That nobody was looking at.
That no one was looking at, right? And then all of a sudden, like,
I was barely looking at it.
It popped off,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it was the right overlap of passion, willing to suffer for something that is very specific, and timing, and leveraging the algorithm and caring what other people care about, which, by the way, is like the most Christian thing you could do, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, we have a God that steps into human history and comes as a human on a rescue mission to save us.
Yeah.
Like, he cares about us.
Yeah.
And so we as Christian creators will be very scoffy and, oh, wow, we're going to do the algorithm. Why? No, you lean into the things people care about, and I think that's how the unlock happens.
That's awesome. Can you give these two gentlemen a round of applause real quick? So good.